Hello, and welcome to another reading. Before we begin, I should let you know this may be coming a little late, but that's because I've been on the road for a good bit of the day. Hey, I had to donate blood, and just for fun, I'm gonna share with you. I got this cool Lord, well, you know who action figure at Target. If I ever meet Ray Fine, I'm totally having him autograph this. So, now the reason we are all here today, Redwall Abbey. Chapter 9. Abbot Mortimer and Constance the Badger meandered through the grounds together. Both creatures were deep in thought. Had they spoken and voiced their thoughts, they would have mentioned the same subject, the safety of Redwall. Down long ages, the beautiful old abbey had stood for happiness, peace, and refuge to all. Diligent mice tended the neat little vegetable patches with every season gathered forth an abundance of fresh produce. Cabbages, sprouts, marrows, turnips, peas, carrots, tomatoes, lettuce, and onions, all in their turn, flower beds, heady and fragrant with countless varieties of summer blooms from rose to humble daisy, were planted by the mice and husbanded by the hard-working bee-folk, who in their turn rewarded Redwall with plentiful supplies of honey and beeswax. The two friends wandered onwards past the pond. Early morning sunlight glinted off the water, throwing out ripples from the fish, caught by the overnight lines which were baited and left to drift every evening by Brother Elf. Ahead of them lay the berry hedges, raspberry, blackberry, bilberry, and the strawberry patch where every August sleepy baby creatures could be seen, their stomachs full after eating the pick of the crop. Gradually they made their way around the big old chestnut trees into the orchard. This was the abbot's favorite spot. Many a leisurely nap had he taken on sunny afternoons with the aroma of ripening fruit hovering in his whiskers, apples, pears, quince, plums, damsons, even a vine of wild grape on the warm red stone of a south-facing wall. Old Mother Nature's blessing lay upon a haven of warm friendliness. Now, with the threat of Clooney upon Redwall, the two old friends assessed the beauteous bounty of their lifelong abode. Sweet birdsong on the still air tinged Constance's heart with sorrow and regret that this peaceful existence would soon pass. Gruffly, she snuffled in her deep throat, blinking off a threatening teardrop. The abbot sensed his companion's distress. He patted the badger's rough coat with a gentle paw. There, old girl, don't fret. Many times in our history has tragedy been forestalled by miraculous happenings. Constance grunted in agreement, not wishing to disillusion her trusting old friend. Deep within her, she knew a dark shadow was casting itself over the abbey. Furthermore, it was happening in the present, not in bygone days of fabled deeds. Matthias seated himself to an early breakfast in Cavern Hall. Nut bread, apples, and a bowl of fresh goat's milk. Cornflower, along with the other woodland creatures granted sanctuary, was sleeping in makeshift quarters provided by the good mice of Redwall. Matthias felt that he had grown up overnight. Duty was a mantle that he had taken willingly upon his shoulders. If there was a threat to Redwall from outside, it must be dealt with. The mice of Redwall were peaceful creatures, but that must not be taken as a sign of weakness. Stolidly, he munched away as he confronted the problem. Eat heartily, Matthias. No point in facing trouble on an empty stomach. Feed the body, nourish the mind. The young mouse was surprised to see that old brother Methuselah had been watching him, his eyes twinkling behind the curious spectacles he invariably wore. The ancient mouse sat down at the breakfast table with a small groan. Don't look so surprised, young one. Your face is an open book to one of my ears. Matthias drained the last of the milk from his bowl, wiping cream from his whiskers with the back of his paw. Give me your advice, brother Methuselah, he said. What would you do? The old mouse wrinkled a nose. Exactly the same thing as you would. That is, if I were younger and not so old and stiff. Matthias felt he had found an ally. You mean you would fight? Methuselah rapped the table with a bony paw. Of course I would. It's the only sensible course to take. He paused and stared at Matthias in an odd manner. There's something about you, young fellow. Did you ever hear the story of how Martin the warrior first came to Redwall? Matthias leaned forward eagerly. Martin? Tell me, brother, I love hearing about the warrior monk. Methuselah's voice dropped to a secretive whisper. It is written in the great chronicle of Redwall that Martin was very young to be such a warrior. He could have been the same age as yourself, Matthias. Like you, he was impulsive and had a great quality of youthful innocence about him when he first came to our abbey. But it is also written that in times of trouble, Martin had the gift of a natural leader, command over others far superior to him in age and experience. The chronicle says that they looked to Martin as some look to a strong father. Matthias was full of wonderment, but he could not help but feeling puzzled. Why do you tell all this to me, brother Methuselah? The old mouse stood up. He stared hard at Matthias for a moment, then turning, he shuffled slowly off. As he went, he called back over his shoulder, Because, Matthias, because he was very like you. Before the young mouse could question the old one further, the Joseph bell tolled out a warning. Sandals flapping, Matthias dashed out into the grounds, nearly colliding with the abbot and Constance, who, like everyone else, were heading for the gatehouse. Brother Rufus and George had an incident to report. A large, evil-looking rat, covered in tattoos and carrying a rusty cutlass, had turned up at the gate. He had tried to gain entry by pretending he was injured. Limping about, the rat explained that he had been a hay cart that overturned into the ditch. Would they come with him and render assistance to his friends, many of whom were lying trapped beneath the cart, crying out for help? Brother Rufus was no fool. How many rats were traveling in the cart altogether? He asked. Oh, a couple of hundred, came the glib reply. Then why, reasoned Brother Rufus, did the rats not give aid to their own companions? Surely all 200 were not trapped. The rat evaded the question and made a great show of rubbing his injured leg. Could they not take him in and dress his wound, perhaps give him a bite to eat, at least? Brother George agreed on condition that the rat surrender his weapon. The rat made as if to do so, then suddenly lunged at Brother George, only to be sent sprawling from a blow from Rufus's staff. Realizing that he was up against two big, competent mice who would stand no nonsense, he became abusive and bad-mouthed. Ha! Just you wait, mice, he raved. There's a whole army of us camped down in the church when I tell Clooney how you treated me. Ho, just wait, that's all. We'll be back, by the fang we will. At that, he slunk off, cursing all mice. The grim news was digested in silence by the assembled creatures. Mrs. Church Mouse began sobbing. Oh, dearie me, did you hear that, Medea? They must be living in our home at St. Ninian's Church. Oh, whatever shall we do? Our dear little home full of dreadful rats. Mr. John Churchman tried to comfort his wife as best he could. There, hush now, missus. Better to lose our house than lose our lives. A good job we got sanctuary here at Redwall. But what about the other creatures in the area? Cried Matthias. Sensible mouse, said Constance. Is Ambrose Spike anywhere about? He'd better do the rounds and tell them to take sanctuary here at the Abbey as quickly as possible. Spike will come to no harm. Once he curls up, there's nothing can touch him. This idea was greeted with enthusiasm. Brother Alf went off to find the hedgehog. The abbot suggested they all go inside the Abbey and await further developments. Matthias piped up again. We'd best mount a guard on the walls. One of the older mice, Sister Clemence, chided Matthias as an upstart. Her voice was stern and condescending. Novice Matthias, you will be silent and do as your abbot commands. Much to everyone's surprise, the abbot came to Matthias's defense. One moment, Clemens. Matthias speaks sense. Let us hear what he has to say. We are none of us too old to learn. All eyes were turned on the young mouse as Matthias heard himself boldly outline his plans for the defense of Redwall. It was 11 o'clock on that glorious June morning. Mossflower Wood and the meadowlands stirred in the brazen voice of the great Joseph Bell. John Churchmouse heaved on the bell rope as he had been told to do by Constance and Matthias. Bong, boom, bong, boom. Even the small creatures in wood and field who could understand no language save their own knew what it meant. Time of danger, place of sanctuary. Carrying what simple belongings they needed, woodlanders and their families hurried from far and near to gain the safety of the abbey before the storm of Cluny broke upon them. Squirrels, mice, voles, moles, otters, all save the birds of the air who were safe anyway. Up the long, dusty road they came, mothers protectively herding young ones while fathers provided a rear guard. Brother Methuselah stood at the gate with the abbot. He translated fully to each group of creatures the abbot's message, and turned construing back to the Father Abbot their grateful thanks with pledges of help and loyalty to Redwall Abbey. For what creature had not been freely given the aid and special knowledge of the kindly mice? All knew that they owed their very existence to the abbot and his community. Healing, aid, food, shelter, and good advice were granted to all. Now was the time to unite and repay, to give any help that was possible. Before much longer, Redwall would require the skills and knowledge of all its woodland allies. They would be gratefully given. Matthias stood on top of the high perimeter walls, watching the road. It was noon, and the sun shone directly overhead. Despite the heat, Matthias had ordered all the mice to put on their hoods. It served a double purpose, to shield their eyes from the sun and create a camouflage effect. Silently, each one stood, armed with a stout staff. The high red sandstone walls were far too lofty to be scaled by any normal creature. Instinctively, Matthias knew this was a good defense and a formidable deterrent. Constance could feel her hackles beginning to prickle. She sniffed the air and shivered despite the heat that shimmered in waves across the meadowlands. The big badger nudged Matthias. "Listen to that." Matthias pricked up his ears and looked at her, questioning. "Even the birds have stopped singing," Constance said quietly. The young mouse gripped his staff tighter. "Yes, silence we can hear. Grasshoppers have gone quiet." Constance peered down the road as he spoke. "Strange for a summer day, little friend." Bong! Every creature standing on the ramparts twitched in fright as the loud voice of the Joseph Bell rang out, and John Churchmouse shouted from his position high in the belfry. "They're coming down the road! I can see them! I can see them!" Chapter 10. Cluny's army halted at the sound of the Joseph Bell. As the dust settled, Fangburn looked to his leader for approval. "They're ringing that big bell again, Chief! Ha ha! Maybe they think it'll frighten us off!" The warlord's eye rested balefully on his stout. "Shut your mouth, fool! If you're done as I ordered and come right back to report the way Cheese Thief did, we might have been inside that abbey by now." Fangburn slunk back into the ranks. He hoped Cluny had forgotten, but Cluny rarely forgot anything on a campaign. The element of surprise had been lost. Now he must try another ploy, the show of force. The mere sight of a fully armed horde had worked before, and he had little doubt it would prove effective now. Ordinarily, peaceful creatures were usually panic-stricken at the sight of Cluny the Scourge at the head of his army. The rat was a cunning general, except the times when his mad rage took control of him. But what need of berserk fits for a bunch of silly mice? Cluny knew the value of fear as a weapon, and Cluny was a fearsome figure. His long, ragged black cloak was made of bat wings, fastened at the throat with a mole's skull. The immense war helmet he wore had the plumes of a blackbird and the horns of a stag beetle adorning it. From beneath the slanted visor, his one eye glared viciously out at the abbey before him. Matthias's voice rang out sharp and clear from the high parapet. "Halt! Who goes there?" Redtooth swaggered forward and took up the challenge in his chief's name as he called back up the walls. "Look well, all creatures! This is the mighty horde of Cluny the Scourge. My name is Redtooth. I speak for Cluny our leader." Constance's reply was harsh and unafraid. "Then speak your peace and be gone, rats!" Silence hung upon the air while Redtooth and Cluny held a whispered conference. Redtooth returned to the walls. "Cluny the Scourge says he will not deal with badgers. He will only speak with the leaders of the mice. Let us in so that my chief may sit and talk to your chief." Redtooth dodged back as his request was greeted by howls of derision and some loose pieces of masonry from the ramparts. These plump little mice were not as peaceful as they first looked. The rats looked to Cluny, but he was eyeing the abbot, who had joined Constance and Matthias. They appeared to be consulting quietly. Cluny watched tensely. There seemed to be some disagreement between the old mouse and his two advisors. They conferred a while. Then Matthias came forward to the parapet. He pointed at Clooney and Redtooth with his staff. You there, and you also. My abbot will talk with you both. The rest must remain outside. A rumble of protest from the horde was silenced by a crack from Clooney's tail. He lifted his visor. We agree, Mouse. Let us in. But what about hostages for safe conduct? Hissed Redtooth. Clooney spat contemptuously. Don't talk fool's talk. Do you imagine a load of mice in funny robes could take me captive? Redtooth gnawed anxiously on a spit claw. Maybe not, Chief, but have you cast a weather eye over that badger? Clooney answered quietly out the side of his mouth. Don't worry. I've been watching her. A real big country bumpkin. Oh, these are mice of honor. They'd sooner die than break their word to anyone. You leave this to me. As Clooney and Redtooth made for the great house door, Constance shouted, Put down your weapons, rat! Throw off your armor to show us that you come in peace. Redtooth spluttered angrily. Hell's teeth! What does that one think he's ordering around? Clooney shot him a warning glance. Quiet. Do as he says. Both rats took off their armor and placed it in a pile on the road. Matthias cried down to Clooney. If you really are Clooney the Scourge, then we know of your tale. It is a weapon. Therefore, you will knot it tightly around your waist so that it cannot be used. Clooney laughed mirthlessly. He squinted at Matthias and cracked his tail dramatically. Young mouse, he called. You do right to ask this thing, for truly you are looking at Clooney the Scourge. Having said this, he took his tail in his claws and pulled the poisoned war spike from his tip. Tossing it on the armor pile, Clooney hitched his tail in a knot around his middle. Now will you let us in, mice? You can see we are unarmed. Ponderously, the heavy gate inched open. The two rats passed through a bristling forest of staves. The gate slammed shut behind them. Clooney mentally estimated the walls to be of immense thickness as he and Redtooth, ducking their heads, emerged from the tunnel-like arch into the abbey grounds where Constance and Matthias were waiting in the sunlight. The defenders followed the two rats closely, menacing them with staves. Matthias rapped out a curt command. Leave us, mice. Go back to your duties on the wall. Unhappy at leaving the abbot unguarded, the mice hesitated to obey the order to withdraw. Clooney addressed Matthias scornfully. Here, mouse, watch me shift him. Suddenly he whirled upon the apprehensive creatures. A single eye rolled madly in its socket as Clooney bared claws and fangs, snarling. Ha ha! I've got a powerful hunger for mice. You best get aloft on those walls. Ha ha! Clooney leaped into the air. The mice scattered in panic. Constance stopped the proceedings with a loud, angry bark. Here now, enough of that, rat. You're here to talk with the abbot. Get along with you. Matthias was glad he was walking behind the rats. He blushed with shame. Clooney had sent the defenders scattering like butterflies in a whirlwind. Matthias was furious. The enemy now knew he was dealing with untrained and untested soldiers. As the party walked towards Cavern Hall, Clooney could sense hostility emanating from the young mouse who flip-flopped behind him in overlarge sandals. Strange for one so young to be counted as a captain, he thought. Moreover, the little fellow didn't seem to fear him. But enough of that. Clooney would deal with him when the time came. Meanwhile, the big rat gazed about his surroundings in secret admiration. What an astounding place! He allowed himself a peek at the future. One day, this would be called Clooney's Castle. He liked the sound of that. Secure from attack, living off the fat of the land. In his mind's eye, he saw it all. Those mice and the woodland creatures enslaved, living just to serve him. He would hold sway as far as the eye could see. Power. An end to his rovings. A dream come true. King Clooney. Entering the abbey, the party stopped to make way for a pretty little field mouse bearing a tray. Oh, Matthias, he said, I brought some refreshments for you, and thank you, Cornflower. Put them down on the table, said Matthias abruptly. Redtooth nudged Clooney. Cornflower, eh? Satan's nose, he's a pretty little one for you. Clooney remained silent. He stood insolently, watching Cornflower set the table in Cavern Hall. A pretty one indeed. The abbot indicated chairs. They all sat except Clooney, who lounged against the table, using the chair as a footstool. He glared at Redtooth until he stood and waited alongside his chief. Idly, Clooney picked up a bowl of honeyed milk and sampled it. Splop! He spat it out on the floor. The abbot folded his paws into the wine sleeve as habit and stared impassively at the warlord. What do you want at Redwall Abbey, my son? Clooney kicked the chair over and laughed madly. As the echoes died around the room, his face went grim. Your son! Ha! That's a good one! I'll tell you what I want, Mouse. I want it all. The lot. Everything. Do you hear me? Matthias's chair clattered on its side as he sprang forward, breaking free from the restraining paws of the abbot. Listen, rat. You don't scare me. I'll give you our answer. You get nothing. Now, do you understand that? Shaking with fury, Matthias allowed himself to be pulled back onto the chair. The abbot turned to Clooney. You must forgive Matthias. He is young and headstrong. Now, as to your proposal, I am afraid it is out of the question. Should you or your army require medical attention, food, clothing, or help upon your way, you will find us only too willing to assist. Clooney interrupted rudely by pounding upon the table until the abbot was silenced. He pointed a claw at Redtooth. Read them the articles. Redtooth held up a tattered parchment. He cleared his throat. These are the articles of surrender, to be obeyed by all creatures who come under the claw of Clooney the Scourge or any of his commanders. 1. Surrender will be total and unconditional. 2. Clooney will execute the leaders of all who choose to oppose him. 3. All property conquered will belong solely to Clooney the Scourge. This includes homes, food, crops, land, and additionally all creatures dwelling on said property. They shall be owned by Clooney. Thwack! Redtooth got no further. Unable to contain himself, Matthias sent his staff ripping through the middle of the articles. As the torn document fluttered to the floor, Redtooth launched himself at Matthias with a snarl. The rat was actually mid-air when a huge blunt paw knocked him flat. He lay stunned with Constance standing over him. Why pick on a small mouse? Surely a big, strong rat like you can deal with an old badger. Come on, try me for size. It was only the timely intervention of Abbot Mortimer that saved Redtooth's life. Constance, would you please let the rat up? Much as I would like to see him get his just deserts, you must remember we cannot break the law of hospitality in our abbey. Redtooth staggered shakily to his feet, backing warily away from the badger. Clooney spoke as if nothing had occurred. You, Abbot Mouse, you have until tomorrow evening to give me your answer. Not normally given to anger, the abbot stared Clooney in the eye, his face a mask of cold fury. I will not need until tomorrow, rat. You can have my answer now. How dare you come here with your rubber band to read articles of death and slavery to me? I tell you that neither you nor your army will ever set paw or claw inside Redwall, not while I or any of my creatures have breath in our bodies to fight and resist you. That is my solemn word. Clooney sneered and turned on his heel. Followed by Redtooth, he stamped out. Out on the stairs between the cavern hall and great hall, he stopped and turned, his cold voice echoing between both chambers. Then die, all of you, every male, female, and young one. You have refused my terms. Now you will suffer the punishment of Clooney. You will beg on your knees for death to come swiftly, but I shall make your torment loud and long before you die. It was then that Constance did something that creatures would speak of in years to come. Exerting the full strength of a female badger, she lifted the massive cavern hall dining table. It was a huge, solid oaken thing that no dozen mice could even move. Dishes clattered and food spilled as Constance heaved the table above her head. Her voice was a roar. Get out, rats! Leave this abbey! I'm weary of your voices. Hurry before I break the laws of hospitality and ask the pardons later. Go, while you still have skulls. With the best grace he could muster, Clooney walked rather quickly up the stairs, followed by Redtooth, who laughed nervously. Big country bumpkin, eh, Chief? One more word from you back there, and she'd have thrown that table and crushed us. Remembering who it was that he had spoken to in this insolent fashion, Redtooth cringed, expecting Clooney to deal him up for impudence. But nothing happened. Clooney was standing transfixed, oblivious to all about him. Even Matthias and the abbot who had fallen to mount, Clooney stood staring at the tapestry. Who is that mouse? He gasped. Matthias followed the direction of the rat's gaze. He walked to the tapestry with his paw outstretched. Do you mean this mouse? Clooney nodded dumbly. Matthias, still with his paw outstretched, declared proudly. This is Martin the warrior. He founded our order, and I'll tell you something else, Rat. Matthias was the bravest mouse that ever lived. If he were here today, he'd just have taken up his big sword and send you and all your bullies packing. Those of you who didn't chop up into crow meat. Much to everyone's surprise, Clooney allowed himself to be shown out. He was like one in a daze, all the way back to the gatehouse. A hush fell over the mice on guard as Clooney and Redtooth were let out on the road. Swiftly, the horde gathered around the warlord and his lieutenant. They awaited orders. Deputizing for Clooney, Redtooth called out, "Form up! Back to the church, everyone!" Clooney marched automatically, shaking his head in disbelief. Martin the warrior, the mouse who pursued him through his nightmares? What did it mean? As Redtooth marched away, a voice hailed from the wall. He turned and looked upwards. The torn articles, the parchment wrapped around, a fistful of rotting vegetables, splattered in his face. Livid with rage, he clawed the foul mess from his eye and saw Constance leaving on the parapet with a wicked grin of delight on her striped muzzle. The badger shouted mockingly, "Don't forget to call again, Rat! I'd be delighted to see you! We've got some unfinished business that I'm looking forward to settling, just you and me, Redtooth!" Before the rat could reply, she had vanished from sight. And we will end there. This is Ranger Fanboy.